to a place that she had vowed never to go back to. She was staring at a stone wall, spray-painted black, standing on a concrete floor, spray-painted black. Her hands fell to her sides. Her heart began to race. It began to pound in her ears, faster, faster, harder. I'm not here. This isn't real. I'm not here. She didn't want to turn around. She knew what she would see, and she didn't want to see it. She knew the moment this day was leading up to. Even though she wouldn't turn, she could imagine the scene behind her. Jessica put her hands to her head, holding herself tightly, trying to pull the thoughts out. This isn't real. Wake up. Please wake up.
Maybe I can't prove that it's not real, but you can't prove that it is.
Jessica's eyes went wide as she stared at the black floor. Those were the words from the short skit being put on by the company that led the workshop. This was the beginning of that horrible moment she had tried so hard to let go of. Jessica's hands fell to her side. She couldn't help it. She had to turn around. She had to look. It was in her school's black box theater. 1 floor underground. Black walls, 1 door to enter from. Arena seating all around a small playing space. 2 actors stood in the middle, performing their piece. The seats in the arena's 5 rows all the way around were full. And there, right in front of her, sitting in the front row, right where they sat only a year ago, were Evan and the other her. They watched the unfolding action in the center of the room. The student who spoke first continued on.
If you can't prove it, I don't believe it.
It was the other student's turn to speak. Jessica didn't remember much about the other students that were in the black box theater that day, but she remembered the girl that was in the center. She remembered her name. Jessica looked from the other her to Evan and then to the girl. Cassie. Cassie stood straight as a board when she responded to her acting partner.
You can't take it on faith? What could that possibly hurt? You have to take everything on faith the first time.
The other student laid into his part, playing the aloof character. He folded his arms and looked away.
I've heard this argument before. Having faith in a chair holding you up isn't the same thing as having faith in some higher power. Your arguments are so pointless.
Jessica saw her old self's shoulders bounce a little as she let out a small laugh. Evan glanced at her. She smiled, grabbed his arm and squeezed it. Jessica's heart sank. She thought that the character had a good point. Christianity was weird. Evan was just not like other Christians. That's why she could like him. But Christianity? She couldn't like that. Cassie continued.
So you'd rather risk it? What would happen if you died right now? What would happen?
That word, die. It snapped Jessica back into what was unfolding. She looked across the acting space. There, on the other side, sat a young man who didn't look like he belonged. He was tall, thin, with unkempt hair that was too long. His eyes filled with hatred. Her heart began to beat in her ears again. Those were the eyes she never wanted to see again. She stopped paying attention to the action of the 2 characters. I'm not letting this happen again. I let it happen once, not again. She moved through the aisles to the front row where the other Evan and her sat. The other Jessica still held on to Evan's arm. She was only pretending to pay attention. Evan, on the other hand, was raptured by the action. Jessica didn't even bother dealing with the other her this time. She couldn't even stand to look at her. It wasn't far-fetched to say that at this point, Jessica hated the girl that was sitting in front of her. She hated herself. She got in Evan's face. He appeared to be looking right through her. She took a gamble. She put her hands out onto his shoulders and they didn't go through this time. She actually touched him. Her heart spiked. Maybe she would be able to warn him this time. Maybe she could make this play out differently. Jessica's voice once again filled with urgency.
Evan, please listen to me. I don't care if this is just a dream or a memory. I'm not letting you do this for me. You can't stay here. You have to leave. Forget about her. Forget about me. Just leave, please.
Evan seemed to still be looking right through her, as if he couldn't see or hear her at all.
Evan? Evan, listen to me, please!
She tried to shake him, but the big football player wouldn't budge. All she was able to do was make him adjust himself in his seat a little bit. She was running out of time. She knew the moment was quickly approaching. In an act of desperation, Jessica lifted her left hand and she planted it on Evan's right cheek, making his head whip away from the action towards the other Jessica. He looked at the real Jessica, but still seemed to be looking through her.
Evan, I'm here. Let me save you. Evan, are you okay?
The other Jessica got his attention with a whisper. Evan looked to her, surprised.
Yeah, I'm fine. That was weird.
Jessica grabbed Evan's face and forced him to look at her.
Evan, you need to leave. Please, leave. Leave this place. If you don't yell.
The sound made Jessica jump. Not because it scared her, but because she knew exactly what it was. She turned to see the young man, the one with those eyes, standing up, with a gun in his hand. Smoke rising from its barrel, and the two actors in the middle laying on the floor. The boy was dead. Cassie tried to move herself away from him as he walked towards her. She was saying something, screaming, but Jessica couldn't hear anything. Her ears were ringing from the shots. Some people stood up and began to run. The man raised the gun in the air and fired again. Jessica saw the flash from the gun and heard it ringing out loud. All she could hear was the ringing and the sound of her pounding heart. The man screamed something, but she couldn't hear him. By his lips, she could see that he said, "Everybody get on the ground." She didn't. She had seen all this before. She looked back to see the other her and Evan slide out of their seats and lay down. She turned to scream, "No!" But no words came out. Jessica's hand went to her throat. She wasn't sure if she couldn't speak or if she just couldn't hear herself. All she could hear was the sound of her heart and the ringing. She thought maybe it was just her. Maybe Evan could hear her now. She rushed to Evan's side. She tried to grab him, but again, her hand went right through him as if he were a ghost. She screamed at him, hoping that he could hear her, but she couldn't hear her own words. She knew she was yelling, but she heard nothing. She saw the man with the gun standing over Cassie, with the gun pressed against her forehead. He asked her the question. Jessica heard her own thoughts, the same thoughts she had had almost a year ago. No, please, no. He's gonna kill her, and then... Her eyes went back to Evan. Her heartbeat stopped pounding as hard. For a moment, she couldn't hear it. For a moment, she couldn't feel it. Like that moment a year ago, when she thought she was going to die, when she couldn't tell if she was even alive. She tried one more time to speak to Evan, quietly, calmly.
Evan, please don't save me. You didn't need to save me. Just run. Don't protect me. Please. Please don't. Just...
Jessica looked up, to see the body of Cassie forced to the ground by the impact of the bullet. It seemed like an eternity, watching her body fall. But in the blink of an eye, the gunman stood before the other her, and she knelt there with the gun pressed against her forehead.
Do you believe in God?
The gunman asked. For a moment, Jessica felt relief. Evan wasn't in between them. She looked down to see him. He wasn't there. She looked back to the gunman, and her heart sank. Evan did stand there in between the other her and the gunman. The gunman smiled. He actually smiled. But it wasn't a joyful one. It was a vengeful, hateful one.
Eager to die, huh? Fine. I'll ask you first. Do you believe in God?
Evan looked right at the gunman's eyes when he responded. You will not lay a finger on her. The gunman pressed the gun to Evan's forehead harder. Answer my question. Jessica couldn't stand this for another second. She leaped to get in the way between the gunman and Evan.
Evan, don't!
But before she could get there, she was pulled away. Something like a shadow, with the likeness of a man, stood behind her, wrapping its strong arms around her, keeping her from moving. She struggled, trying to get free.
Stop it! Let me go! Let me go! I need to save him!
Save him? You already killed it once. Now you have to do it again.
The shadow seethed into her ear. She froze. She stopped fighting. The scene before her froze. The shadow held her close and whispered in her ear.
You know. In your heart, you know. What is happening right now is your fault. You put him in this position.
Jessica's knees became weak. She slipped to the ground while the shadow still held her tightly. He slipped one hand around her neck and began to squeeze. She whispers and cries through the pain. No, please. Evan, don't save me.
You know why he thinks he needs to save you. You know why he couldn't let you die. This is your fault. You were the one who led him on. You put him in this position. You are as guilty as the gunman.
The choking hand around her neck was becoming too much. The beat of her heart pounded in her ears. Tears fell from her eyes. Don't do this. The shadow gripped harder. Jessica began to gasp for air.
This is your doing. He's just doing what you made him do. This is your fault. And I know you believe it. I know you accept it. Do you know how I know this? Because I am part of your heart. I am part of your wicked, ugly heart. Do you know what my name is?
Jessica finally tries to tear her eyes away from the frozen gunman and Evan. She sees the shadow's dark eyes out of the corner of her own. It's murder. Murder released her neck and forces her to look at Evan and the gunman. She saw Evan's lips move. He said, yes. It was as if it happened in slow motion. Evan's body snapped back with the force of the bullet. He fell slowly. Jessica whispers, no. There was only darkness. Murder still held her in his tight grasp, whispering in her ear,
It's your fault Evan died. You are the one who killed it. You.